Should we talk about Elliot Anderson? Because,
Yeah.
I mean, there's been a lot of, you just got to pay what they want if you want someone. I mean, it seems a mad amount of money to pay for anything, let alone just a person. But, that is football now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like going to the supermarket and spending 150 quid on a weekly shop, but it's the way of the world. And I don't think it's as ridiculous as people are making out, purely because he's an England starting midfielder. I'm not saying he's as good as Declan Rice was, but he's a very, very good central midfield player who's developed exceptionally over the last few years. And it's a similar price to what Rice went to 2-3 years ago. So I can kind of understand the price. And in fairness, Marinakis at Forest is a fierce negotiator. He showed that last season with Morgan Gibbs-White and getting him to stay and kind of debunking what Tottenham were trying to do. So it's not like Man City haven't got the money either. So if he's the player that's been identified, I think it's interesting because obviously previously when Manchester City have signed players, it's, you're going to Manchester City, you're going to go and work with Pep. What can he do for your career? Players going there now, it's a little bit more unknown, isn't it, with Maresca?
Yeah. I think that is interesting. And I think it's, Forest are good. Elliot Anderson is really good. Newcastle fans must be like, God, they just sold him for PSR and now look at it. But it's interesting when you put a player, with better players around them, it'll be really interesting to see what his ceiling is.
Yeah, I think it's imperative for him, actually, that Manchester City hold on to Rodri, because that's got the makings of a nice partnership. I think if Rodri's to move on as well this summer, which has been linked, I'm not sure whether that will happen or whether it won't. Suddenly with the Bernardo Silva void as well, you're asking him to step up and kind of be the main man, which I think is a tough ask in his first season at Manchester City. Obviously, they'd probably recruit if Rodri did go, and maybe Rodri's not the player he was a couple of years ago after injury. But I think it's about getting the components right around him as well, because there's a situation here where he could be at Manchester City, new manager, you're then played and tasked with being the senior midfielder, and I think that would be a big ask for him, even though he's a phenomenal player.
The Bernardo Silva void was a brilliant film. I mean, it was a bit predictable in the end, but I loved it as a movie. Anyway, Charlie, do you have a sensible question?
I was going to say, Dan, big Aston Villa fan, as we know. Are you quite happy that John McGinn's coming home unscathed?
I'm not happy that he's coming home. I was in the weird situation where I actually wanted Scotland to do quite well as an England fan because of him, and I've watched every Scotland game. I've watched him closely. I thought he's probably out of everyone the one that comes with his head held the highest. He obviously scored the goal that he scored, ending the 10,000-day drought or whatever it was without Scotland scoring a World Cup goal. And he had that moment that Scotland fans will celebrate. That they were in a horrific group, to be in a group with Morocco and Brazil, and maybe they've been exposed tactically a little bit. But I think McGinn had a pretty good tournament, all things considered. But yes, I'm glad he's not hurt. You're not sure?
I think
I don't think even McTominay turned out. I don't think they had to.
I mean, the point is they had to get a 9 or an 8, 9, 10 out of 10 performance against one of those two, and I don't think either of them really. It's hard because obviously you're playing against Brazil. Like, that is hard, and they weren't to blame.
I wonder if they were allowed to play how they wanted to play. That might be, Steve Clarke might have changed how they want. Anyway, let's talk about the transfers, because that's what we're doing, isn't it? Arsenal set to make a move for Bruno Guimaraes. I mean, Newcastle United lose Anthony Gordon. We just mentioned Elliot Anderson used to be theirs. And now they're possibly losing Bruno Guimaraes, probably their best player at the moment. And you go
and Tonali,
and they've got all the money in the world, but they're not allowed to spend it. Does it not show up PSR to be slightly broken?
I mean, in all fairness, you don't want me talking about PSR because you won't be able to go to a break. I'll just sit here and moan about it for an hour. So I won't do that. But what I will say is that Newcastle are in a pretty precarious position right now for me. They've lost Anthony Gordon, which I think, look at it, you can see that that's a good deal for all parties. I understand why they accepted that. Maybe it doesn't send out a great message a year after losing Isak as well, but I can understand it. Suddenly, the Tonali one's the one that doesn't make a lot of sense, but he obviously has got his heart set on Tottenham in some ways. De Zerbi's a manager that he obviously wants to go and work for. I expect Tottenham will get to the fee that Newcastle want and they'll sell him as well. That's when it suddenly looks, that's not a good look. Tonali leaving Newcastle to go to Tottenham, who finished 17th 2 seasons in a row. Does Bruno Guimaraes look at what's going on around him and think, well, given everything here. I've lifted a trophy. Is it the end of my time? I quite like the challenge of Arsenal. Actually, I don't think Arsenal kind of enter into any form of discussion without a little bit of encouragement. And I did a show on this yesterday on talkSPORT too, and I don't think it would take a lot for it to go into free fall for Newcastle. I don't think it would take much for them to be what Tottenham have been over the last couple of years. I really, really don't. Their recruitment's been patchy. Eddie Howe's under a little bit of pressure now, whereas he never has been before. If they lose too many players, you wouldn't necessarily trust them to recruit well off the back of it. So if I was a Newcastle fan, and I think they are, I'd be seriously worried right now about where my club's heading.
And actually, you don't know. We still don't know. If you look at what's happened with Live Golf, you're just still not quite sure exactly what the owners' priorities are and have changed slightly. And, you know, and that's such a bigger picture question that it's really hard to know where Newcastle stand. Like we're talking about amounts of money. Maybe I haven't watched enough of Tonali to know if 100 million seems wild for him. I don't know what you think, Dan, or maybe it's fine.
Less than Elliot, I'm trying to work out whether it being less than Elliot Anderson is a fair thing or not. I think he's a brilliant player. Tonali, obviously, he's had his problems since he's come into the Premier League. It just seems to be the going right now. Like clubs know that the so-called big six teams have money, and Newcastle can't spend that money, so they're going to demand a huge price point, same as Forest did for Elliot Anderson, same as Villa will do for Morgan Rogers if someone comes to the table for him. I think the clubs that are outside of that big six that don't get the revenue that they do, it's the only way they can try and kind of make up the shortfall is by overcharging those clubs, and I think that's what Nottingham Forest did, and I think that's what Newcastle are probably trying to do as well.
Barca Jim's been in touch, Dan. Furious with your thoughts. That McGinn had a good World Cup.
And when I say good, it was a low bar. I think he was the best of a bad bunch. That's what I would say. You said about them needing to be like 8 or 9 out of 10. I'd say the tactics were like a 1 or 2 out of 10.
Yeah, I agree. Passing it to the other team in your box is a bad tactic.
It's not great, that.
Have Villa done any business? You done anything yet?
No, we're not allowed to. We're kind of under these UEFA constraints at the moment where we have to run everything by them. So if we are to buy someone, we have to sell someone, basically. Okay. That's the model that Villa are operating. And I don't think it's a model that will catch on.
Where's Harvey Elliott?
On holiday, I suspect. He's not a Villa. He won't be coming back to Villa. That's for sure, because he didn't play enough games to get the loan to buy fee to be activated.
So he's back at Liverpool now, is he?
He'll be back at Liverpool, hoping for a chance under Iraola, and probably wishing that he hadn't made the move he did 12, 13 months ago, to be honest. But I wish him well. I hope he has a good season with whoever he's
Spurs all day long. He'll be at Spurs.
Could be.
I guarantee him. Spurs all day long.
I think Tottenham's investment is really interesting. I think, I like what they've done so far. Like buying players that are good and sensible, and I think it feels odd. I must say, it feels odd that they're just going. I think what they've decided is they actually have to spend the wages that the big complaint of Tottenham fans is they just don't match the wages of the other top 6 sides.
Yeah,
and so eventually, it eventually results in not having quite as good of players, and now I think they've just gone whatever, have what you want. So it'll be fascinating to see I don't know what you think, Dan, with no European football, if they keep investing like this, and I don't quite understand how, I suppose they create lots of revenue, right? That's why they can spend this money. It will be really interesting to see what De Zerbi can do. He's got time on the training ground. We saw that work with Carrick at United. You have time, your players are rested. I think we don't talk enough about footballers being exhausted. Like it's hard. It's harder to play if you're tired. So Tottenham they're not going to win the league, but it'd be really interesting to see how well they do this season, I think, Dan.
Yeah, football's weird, isn't it? Because you can dress not being in Europe up as being a real positive thing for a team. And in fairness, it probably is for Tottenham on this occasion, and build and try and get into their next season where they're better set to fight on multiple fronts. I think the Tottenham hierarchy, they absolutely have got a manager now that they've got to buy into, and they've got to trust him, and they've got to back him. So I think quite simply, that's what they're doing. And it's kind of weird because you would think Tottenham in their current kind of guise aren't an attractive proposition, but they've done a great job over the last kind of 6 weeks or so of dressing themselves up to being very attractive, and that they've bought some good players. Obviously, they're not going to finish 17th next season if they continue in the vein that they are with recruitment. I think they've got in 2 really good players that will make them better on free transfers. I don't know if the Van Hecke deal gone through yet, but they're signing Van Hecke from a club that is better than them. He's a good defender for me, infinitely better than Romero, and will do you less damage than Romero will do you as well. I think he's the most overrated footballer that I've ever seen in my life. I think he's an accident waiting to happen, and if I was a Spurs fan, I'd be absolutely elated that he was leaving. Van Hecke's an upgrade on him for me, and then I'm sure they'll do business at the top end as well. And if they get Tonali, it's a fantastic bit of recruitment from their perspective, because that's an ambitious signing, a signing you wouldn't have called them to make at the end of the season.
Good stuff, Dan.
Thank you, Dan,
for coming on, my friend. Always nice to chat.
Thank you. See you soon.
Dan Bardell there.
Can't believe you said Spurs are going to win the league, Max.
Yeah, well, I think so. Put that on Instagram.
Max Rushton says Spurs will win the league.
Come at me in the comments.